I still remember the day we moved into our little house on Maple Street. It was the kind of day that seemed to promise everything. The sun was shining, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming lilacs. My wife, Sarah, stood beside me with that radiant smile, her auburn hair catching the light. We had been married for 5 years, and everything felt perfect. We both worked hard, Sarah as a marketing manager and I as a software developer. Our lives were busy, but we made time for each other, sharing dinner every night and taking weekend trips to the mountains. Our home was filled with laughter and love, or so I thought. We had built a life together, one filled with dreams of children, vacations, and a future that seemed bright. But all of that shattered the day I discovered her infidelity. It was a typical Wednesday when I decided to surprise Sarah at her office with lunch. I had just parked the car when I noticed her in the parking lot, but she wasn't alone. There he was, Mark, a colleague of hers, leaning in too close, whispering something that made her laugh. The laughter echoed in my ears like a cruel joke, and I felt my heart drop. I shouldn't have been there, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, hiding behind a nearby tree, and watched as they exchanged a lingering embrace. That moment felt like a knife twisting in my gut, and suddenly the world around me faded. The laughter, the warmth of the day, everything vanished, leaving only a cold emptiness. When I confronted Sarah that evening, I was a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, betrayal. I had thought we were happy, that our love was unshakable. I felt like a fool. She was seated on the couch, her eyes wide with surprise when I walked in. I dropped the takeout bags on the kitchen counter, my hands shaking as I faced her. "I saw you," I said, my voice trembling. "With Mark, how could you?" Her reaction was immediate. She didn't deny it. Instead, she shifted the blame onto me. "You're always so busy with work, Jake. You don't pay attention to me anymore." I felt lonely. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if she was trying to justify her actions, placing the responsibility for her affair squarely on my shoulders. "Lonely," I echoed, my voice rising. "You think that gives you the right to cheat on me, to betray everything we built together?" My heart raced as I felt the anger boil inside me. I wanted to scream, to make her understand the pain she had caused, but instead I felt a deep sense of loss. Sarah's defenses went up, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand what it's like. You're so wrapped up in your work you don't even notice me anymore." I felt my chest tight. How could she twist this? I had always tried to be supportive, to give her the life she wanted. I took a step back, trying to process what was happening. In that moment, it was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, and I couldn't understand how we had gotten here. The woman I loved, who I thought knew me inside and out, was blaming me for her choices. As the silence stretched between us, I realized I had two choices: to accept her blame or to fight back. I felt the urge to make her see the truth, to confront her about the reality of her actions. But for now, I was left standing in the wreckage of our marriage, grappling with my emotions. The confrontation spiraled into a chaotic exchange of accusations and justifications. I stood there, my heart racing, grappling with the reality that the woman I loved was trying to shift the blame onto me. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie unfold where the protagonist was completely out of touch with reality and I was the unfortunate audience member. "Jake, you've changed," Sarah shouted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. "You used to be fun, spontaneous. Now all you do is work and come home exhausted. I needed someone who would pay attention to me." I couldn't believe my ears. "So that justifies sleeping with Mark. You could have talked to me, Sarah. You could have told me how you felt." I was shouting now, the frustration spilling over. I wanted to shake her, to make her see the damage she was inflicting on our relationship. I was angry at her, furious at her betrayal, but beneath that anger was a deep well of hurt that I could barely comprehend. "Talk, what good would that have done?" she retorted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You wouldn't have listened anyway. You're always too busy with your projects, your coding. You've lost sight of what matters." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I felt a rush of guilt flood through me, but I quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about me. It was about her choices. "You think I don't care? I've worked hard for us, for our future." I shot back, my voice rising again. You made a choice to betray me, and now you want to pin it on me like I'm the villain in this story. The tension in the room was palpable, and the silence that followed was deafening. I could see the tears welling in her eyes, but instead of feeling sympathy, I felt coldness. She had crossed a line, and I was left standing there, reeling from the betrayal. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with someone else, I said, my voice quieter but laced with a steel resolve. You can't just blame me for your infidelity, Sarah. That's not how this works. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she just stared at me, a mix of anger and confusion on her face. It was as if she had expected me to roll over to accept her excuses without question. But I wasn't going to do that. I refused to let her manipulate the narrative any longer. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. You need to take responsibility for your actions. You owe me that much. The words hung in the air, a challenge and a plea all at once. Sarah's expression shifted, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of realization in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. I'm not the only one at fault here, Jake, she said, her voice low and filled with bitterness. You've let this happen. You've pushed me away. Her words stung, but I held my ground. No, Sarah, you made a choice. You chose to betray me. You need to own that. The argument continued, a back and forth that felt both exhausting and futile. I wanted to break through to her to make her understand the depth of her betrayal, but every time I thought I was getting through, she would deflect, twisting the knife further, even if it was unintentional. Eventually, the conversation reached a standstill. We were both too emotionally drained to continue. I felt like I had fought a battle and lost, yet I also felt a flicker of strength within me. I wasn't going to let her blame me for her actions. I wouldn't allow her to manipulate me any longer. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a surge of determination. I would find a way to make her see the truth, to hold her accountable for the mess she had created. The path ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face whatever came next. I wouldn't let her walk away from this without acknowledging the pain she had caused. I needed a plan. I needed to confront her blame-shifting directly, to show her that I wouldn't be the scapegoat in her story. I would make her face the reality of her choices, no matter how painful it was for both of us. In the days that followed, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions that I struggled to navigate. The initial shock of Sarah's betrayal had morphed into a toxic mix of anger, confusion, and heartache. I replayed our confrontation over and over in my mind, dissecting every word, every glance. Each time, I felt a surge of indignation at her attempts to shift the blame onto me. It was infuriating, and I was determined to make her own up to her actions. But as the dust settled, I also faced an uncomfortable truth. Her infidelity had unearthed insecurities I had buried deep within me. Was I really that neglectful? Had I been so wrapped up in my work that I had failed to notice her unhappiness? The thought gnawed at me, and I found myself questioning everything about our relationship. I had always considered myself a good husband, but doubt began to creep in, casting shadows on my self-esteem. I sat on the edge of our bed one evening, staring at the empty space beside me where Sarah should have been. The silence was suffocating, and I felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. I had always believed that love could conquer all obstacles, but now I was left wondering if our foundation had been built on shaky ground. I felt inadequate, as if I had somehow failed her, and those thoughts only intensified my anger toward her. The tension in our home was palpable. We moved around each other like strangers, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. I could see the guilt and shame in her eyes, but her defensiveness remained intact. It was as if she was trapped in a narrative where she was both the victim and the perpetrator, and I was left grappling with the aftermath. I needed to confront her again, to push her to recognize the impact of her choices, but I didn't want to approach it in a way that would trigger her defensiveness. I wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences, not just for me, but for our marriage. I needed to break through the walls she had built around herself. One night, as I lay awake, I formulated a plan. I would sit her down and articulate my feelings clearly, without accusation. I wanted to share how her actions had affected me, how they had shaken my belief in our love. It was time for a real conversation, one that stripped away the blame and focused on accountability. The following evening, I found Sarah sitting on the couch, lost in thought. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady but soft. She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "About what?" Her tone was guarded, but I pushed through. "About us." "About what happened," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I need you to hear me out without interrupting." She hesitated but nodded, and I took that as a sign to continue. "When I found out about you and Mark, it felt like my entire world crumbled. I thought we had something real, something worth fighting for. But now I feel betrayed and confused. I need you to understand how deeply this has hurt me." As I spoke, I could see her expression shift. The defenses she had built began to waver, and for the first time since the confrontation, I saw a glimpse of vulnerability. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Jake," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I know you didn't," I replied, my tone softening. "But your actions had consequences. You chose to be with someone else instead of coming to me. I want to understand why you felt that was the only option." Her eyes filled with tears and she looked away, struggling to find the words. "I felt so alone," she admitted finally. "I thought you didn't care anymore. I thought I was just there." The admission struck me like a blow. I had never intended for her to feel that way. "I'm sorry if I made you feel neglected," I said, my voice cracking. "But that doesn't justify your actions. You could have talked to me. We could have worked through it together." "I know," she whispered, finally meeting my gaze. "But I didn't know how to reach out. I was scared. I wanted to feel wanted again." We sat in silence, the weight of our words hanging heavy in the air. I felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that we could begin to untangle the mess we had created, but I also knew that this was just the beginning. I needed her to take responsibility, to understand that her choices had consequences that extended beyond just us. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "I'm willing to work on this, but you need to own what you did. You need to acknowledge that you chose to betray our trust. I can't heal until you do." She nodded slowly, her expression a mixture of regret and understanding. "I will, I promise. I don't know how to fix this." "It starts with honesty and accountability," I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "We have to be open with each other, no more blaming. If we're going to rebuild, we need to do it together." As we sat there, I felt a sense of determination rising within me. This was going to be a long and difficult journey, but I was ready to face it head on. I wouldn't let her blame me for her choices anymore. It was time for both of us to take responsibility for the state of our marriage. The following days felt like a fragile truce. Sarah and I began to navigate the aftermath of our confrontation with cautious optimism. There were moments of genuine connection, but the specter of her betrayal loomed large over us. I could see she was trying to engage more, to communicate, but I also sensed a lingering fear, a fear of vulnerability, a fear of being judged. One evening, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of waiting for her to initiate conversations, I would create a safe space for both of us to openly discuss our feelings. I planned a simple dinner at home, something intimate, where we could talk without distractions. My hope was that by fostering an environment of openness, we could start to heal. As I set the table, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I was nervous about how she would react, whether she would truly be willing to take the next steps toward accountability. I wanted to believe that we could overcome this, but doubt still lingered in the back of my mind. When Sarah arrived home, I greeted her with a warm smile, hoping to ease the tension that had settled between us. "Hey, I made your favorite," I said, gesturing to the dinner I had prepared. "I thought we could have a nice evening together." Her eyes softened, and she smiled back, albeit hesitantly. "That sounds nice, Jake." We sat down to eat, and the initial awkwardness slowly began to fade as we talked about mundane topics, the weather, our work, even our plans for the weekend. It felt good to share light-hearted moments, but I knew we couldn't avoid the elephant in the room for long. After dinner, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to address the issue head-on. "Can we talk about what happened?" I asked, my voice steady but gentle. Sarah looked down at her empty plate, her fingers nervously tracing the rim. "I guess we have to, don't we?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I reached across the table and took her hand in mine. I want you to know that I'm here for you, but we need to be honest with each other. I need you to be accountable for what happened. We can't move forward without that. She nodded slowly, her expression shifting to one of determination. You're right, I've been avoiding it, hoping it would just go away, but it won't, will it? No, I said firmly. It won't. We have to confront it together. I need you to tell me why you chose to cheat. What led you to that point? Her eyes filled with tears and she took a deep breath. I felt invisible, Jake. I kept thinking that if I could just be someone else's priority, maybe I would feel valued again. I didn't think about the consequences. I just wanted to escape the loneliness. I felt a pang in my chest at her words. It was painful to hear, but I appreciated her honesty. I never meant for you to feel that way. I was so focused on my work, thinking I was doing it for us, that I neglected you. I should have noticed you were struggling. I know you love me, she said, her voice trembling. But love isn't just about words or actions. It's about feeling seen and heard. I didn't feel that from you for a long time. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. I get it now. I see how my behavior contributed to your feelings of isolation, but infidelity isn't the solution. It only makes everything worse. I know, she replied, tears spilling down her cheeks. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could change everything. I squeezed her hand gently. We can't change the past, but we can work on the future. It's going to take time and effort from both of us. We need to be honest about our feelings and communicate openly. No more blame, just accountability. I promise, she said, her voice steadying. I want to do this. I want to fix us. With that, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. This was a turning point. We were finally addressing the core issues that had driven a wedge between us. It wouldn't be easy, but we were both willing to put in the work. As the evening progressed, we shared more about our feelings. We discussed our dreams, our fears, and what we wanted from each other moving forward. It felt liberating to finally be honest, to peel back the layers of hurt and resentment that had built up over time. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time since her betrayal, I felt a sense of clarity. We were both flawed individuals who had lost sight of each other, but we were also capable of growth and change. It was time to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of trust and accountability. In the days that followed, we continued to have these open conversations. Some were harder than others, but each discussion brought us closer. I began to see glimpses of the woman I fell in love with, the passionate, vibrant woman who had once been my partner in everything. But I also knew that the journey toward healing would require more than just talk. We needed to establish boundaries, find new ways to connect, and most importantly, rebuild the trust that had been shattered. I was ready for the challenge. I wasn't going to let her blame me for her choices anymore. I would stand firm in my resolve to hold her accountable, but I would also be there to support her as she faced the reality of her actions. Together, we would navigate this turbulent sea, and though the waves might be rough, I believed we could find our way back to calmer waters. As the weeks passed, Sarah and I began to establish a routine that revolved around open communication and accountability. We set aside time each week for what we called check-ins, where we would sit down and discuss our feelings about our relationship, our individual needs, and any lingering issues. It was a new practice for us, one that felt both foreign and necessary. At first, the check-ins were awkward. We would sit across from each other at the kitchen table, both nervous, unsure of how to begin. But as we continued with this practice, it became easier. We learned to listen to each other without immediately jumping to defend ourselves. We began to understand that vulnerability was not a weakness, it was a strength. One evening, during one of our check-ins, I decided to broach a sensitive subject that had been weighing on me. Sarah, I think it's important for us to talk about boundaries, I said, looking her in the eyes. After everything that happened, I feel like we need to redefine what's acceptable in our relationship. She nodded, her expression serious. I agree. I've been thinking about that too. I don't want to put either of us in a position where we feel neglected or unappreciated again. Right, I continued. I want us to be able to express our needs without fear of judgment. If something is bothering you, I want you to feel comfortable telling me, even if it's hard. "I promise I will," she said, her voice steady. "I've realized that keeping things bottled up only leads to resentment. I'll do my best to communicate better." We talked about specific boundaries, such as how much time we would spend together versus apart, and how we would prioritize each other's needs. It felt liberating to establish these guidelines, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope for our future. However, there were still moments of tension. There were evenings when I would come home from work, and I could see the shadows of doubt clouding her eyes. I knew the memories of her betrayal were still fresh in her mind, and I often found myself reassuring her that I was committed to rebuilding our relationship. "Jake, do you think you'll ever be able to fully forgive me?" she asked one night, her voice trembling. I paused, considering her question. "I want to believe that I can. Forgiveness isn't a straight line, it's a process, but I need you to understand that trust takes time to rebuild. I'm willing to work on it, but I need to see consistent effort from you too." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm trying, I promise. I just don't want to lose you." I reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You won't lose me if we keep working together. We need to be patient with each other." As the days turned into weeks, I noticed subtle changes in Sarah. She was more engaged and present, and I could see her making an effort to bridge the emotional gap that had formed between us. We began to go on regular date nights again, trying to recreate the spark that had drawn us together in the first place. But even with these efforts, there were moments when the past would rear its ugly head. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a photo of Mark. He was smiling, and the sight of him sent a jolt of anger through me. I felt the familiar wave of insecurity wash over me, and I couldn't help but bring it up during our check-in. "I saw Mark's photo today," I said, my voice low. It made me feel unsettled. Sarah's expression shifted, and I could see the guilt wash over her. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm not in contact with him anymore, I promise." "I know," I replied, trying to steady my emotions. "But it's hard for me to see him. It reminds me of what happened, and I don't want to feel this way." "I understand," she said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes to help you feel secure. I never want to cause you pain again." We talked about how we could navigate these triggers together. I suggested that we could both limit our exposure to things that reminded us of the affair, at least until we felt more secure in our relationship. It was a small step, but it felt important. As we continued to communicate openly, I began to feel a shift within myself as well. I realized that I had been holding onto my anger as a defense mechanism, fearing that if I let it go, I would be vulnerable to being hurt again. But I also understood that holding onto that anger was only preventing me from healing. One afternoon, while I was out for a run, I had a moment of clarity. I thought about the love Sarah and I had shared, the laughter and the dreams we had built together. I realized that I didn't want to let her betrayal define our relationship. I wanted to move forward, to find a way to rebuild what we had lost. That evening, I sat down with Sarah and shared my thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness," I said. "I want to let go of the anger I've been holding onto. I want us to focus on moving forward, not just surviving in the shadow of the past." Her eyes widened, and I could see the hope flicker in her gaze. "That means so much to me, Jake. I want to do the same. I want us to heal together." We embraced tightly, and in that moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. Together, we would navigate this journey, hand in hand, and emerge stronger on the other side. With each passing day, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a sense of renewed commitment to our marriage. I was no longer going to let her infidelity define us. It was time to focus on love, trust, and accountability, the pillars of the relationship we were rebuilding. As we continued to work through our issues, I felt a growing sense of resilience within myself. I was learning to forgive, to let go of the hurt, and to embrace the possibility of a brighter future. The months that followed our commitment to rebuilding our relationship were filled with ups and downs, but I began to see a clear path emerging. Sarah and I worked diligently to reestablish our connection, and while the scars of her betrayal still lingered, they no longer defined us. Instead, they became part of our story, a story of resilience, accountability, and ultimately love. One evening, as I sat in the living room flipping through old photo albums, I stumbled upon pictures from our early days together. There we were, young and carefree, our smiles radiating joy and hope for the future. I felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with a bittersweet ache. Those moments felt so distant now, but I realized that they were also a reminder of what we had fought for. I called Sarah over and together we reminisced about the adventures we had experienced, our first trip to the beach, our wedding day, and the quiet evening spent cooking together. As we laughed and shared memories, I felt a warmth spreading through me. It was a reminder that beneath the pain, the love we had was still there, waiting to be reignited. "Do you remember this?" I asked, pointing to a photo of us on a hiking trail, both of us grinning from ear to ear. Sarah leaned in closer, her eyes sparkling with recognition. "I remember you almost fell into that creek. You were so determined to take the perfect picture." We laughed, and in that moment I felt a sense of hope. We were slowly rediscovering each other, peeling back the layers of hurt and resentment. As spring turned into summer, we made a conscious effort to prioritize our relationship. We scheduled regular date nights, explored new hobbies together, and even took a weekend getaway to the mountains. It felt good to reconnect, to experience the joy of each other's company again. But even amidst these positive changes, I knew that trust was a delicate thing. There were still moments when insecurities would creep in, and I would catch myself wondering if Sarah was truly committed to our marriage. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself spiraling into doubt. "Sarah," I called out, my voice tinged with uncertainty. She came into the room, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I just Sometimes I worry that I'm not enough for you, that you'll slip back into old patterns." Her expression softened and she stepped closer, taking my hands in hers. "Jake, I promise I'm committed to us. I know I messed up, but I'm working every day to prove to you that I want to be here. You are more than enough." For me, I looked into her eyes, searching for sincerity. I found it there, a deep, unwavering resolve. "I need to hear that," I said. "I need to know that you're not just saying it to make me feel better." "I mean it," she said firmly. "Every single day I think about how I can be better for you. I don't want to lose you again." Her words resonated with me, grounding my swirling thoughts. I realized that while trust takes time to rebuild, it also requires active engagement from both partners. It was a two-way street, and I needed to trust her as much as she needed to earn that trust. As summer faded into fall, we continued to grow, both as individuals and as a couple. We sought therapy together, which provided us with tools to navigate our feelings more effectively. Our therapist helped us understand the importance of setting boundaries and gave us strategies to communicate more openly about our needs. One evening, after a particularly enlightening session, we sat in our living room, reflecting on how far we had come. "I feel like we're finally starting to understand each other," I said, a sense of pride swelling within me. "Me too," Sarah replied, a smile lighting up her face. "I think we're learning to love each other better." "Better," I echoed, feeling the weight of that word. It was a promise, a commitment to continue growing together. As the leaves began to change and the days grew shorter, I found myself appreciating the little things again. The way Sarah's laughter filled the room, the warmth of her hand in mine, the comfort of knowing we were both actively choosing each other every single day. Looking back on that tumultuous period, I realized that the journey of healing had transformed us. We had faced the darkest parts of our relationship and emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of our needs. I had learned that love is not just about the good times, it's also about how we navigate the storms together. In the end, I understood that accountability was not just about blaming or shamming. It was about taking ownership of our actions and working together to forge a path forward. I had confronted Sarah's blame shifting, but in doing so, I had also confronted my own insecurities, fears, and doubts. As we embraced that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had weathered the storm, and while the scars would always remain, they were no longer a source of pain. Instead, they were a testament to our resilience, a reminder of the love that had guided us through the darkest moments. "Here to us," I whispered, holding her close. "Here to us," she replied, her voice filled with warmth and sincerity. And in that moment, I knew we were ready to embrace whatever came next together.